Tell me if you've heard this one before.
Okay.
This question.
Is this a joke? Oh.
No. But I can't remember if I've asked you guys this question or not before, so I have a backup.
Okay.
But I'll try out this one. If you could be friends with any celebrity, but no one else could know about it, and you couldn't get anything from it, like you couldn't get any of their like money or social status, you just could be secret friends with any celebrity, who would you choose?
Have we asked this one?
No.
I would remember this one. This is a great question.
Wow, you guys are really excited.
I am.
I'm into this. I thought I had asked this before, so I'm glad I haven't.
This is a very Nathan-esque question.
You know who actually sent this question in? I'm pretty sure it was Stephanie Garza.
Oh.
Hey, Steph.
I'm pretty sure.
Shout out producer Matt.
Producer Matt.
Woo!
Someone put a ring
who
on
is
that.
married to Stephanie. For those
true.
of you that don't know.
Any celebrity that we could be best friends with, but no one can know about it, and we can't gain anything from their
right, just their friendship.
acclaim.
That's the only
Just like
thing you
as a
can
person.
gain. Yeah. Maybe I should have given you guys more time to think about this.
We could cut the silence. What do you think?
In
Do you
editing?
have an answer?
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't.
In post.
I don't.
Gosh. It feels
Matt,
like
we're gonna
high
need to
stakes.
cut that silence.
It feels like high stakes McGee, high stakes situation. Like, what if I pick wrong, you know? I don't know. I don't really think any celebrities are that cool. Or like, I don't know because I don't know them.
I think one person who seems fun is Oprah.
Yeah.
I think she seems like fun. Like she seems very
That's a good answer.
down to earth, and like she could give good wisdom and advice, but she also likes to have a good time, you know? And she has a place on Orcas Island.
She does, yeah.
And
I think she just sold it.
Oh, did she?
I
For
just saw
like
that,
billions of dollars.
I read an article about someone, it was Rick Ross, bought a house so that he could drive past it.
What? Why couldn't he drive past it anyway?
He said he just wanted to buy a house so he could drive past it.
But why couldn't he
No
drive
other
past
reason.
it anyway?
I don't know.
I don't get that.
Just to say that it was his house.
I also don't know who that is. Oh, I actually have a different answer. Sorry. Trevor Noah. He would be so fun to be friends with.
Fun.
Because he's hilarious and well observed.
Oh, comedians
and
are good ones.
He would be a great
so
hang,
fun. Yeah,
I feel like.
absolutely. That's my official answer.
That's really the question. Like, who's the best celebrity hang? That you
yeah.
can tell me
Who would be
about?
fun to hang out with? Slash could whatever
Yes.
you want from your friend. Like give good advice
Yes.
or be compassionate. I don't know what you seek out in friendship, but
I would like to hang out with Conan O'Brien.
oh yeah,
I think Conan would be a good hang. It'd be funny. Like, I don't feel like people. So in this
Kinda
universe, would anyone ever see me hanging out with Conan, or is this always a one-on-one thing?
it's always one-on-one.
Always one-on-one.
So not even like, what if Conan has friends? Does he get brought? Can Josh be brought into Conan's group of friends and like hang out, and then they just don't tell anyone either?
Right? Yeah.
So it's not like it's just like Conan and Josh just meet for coffee one-on-one in the secret.
Yeah,
coffee
you
shop.
could hang out like whatever friends do, but it couldn't be this like
Big thing.
known thing where you then you ride his coattails, you know?
I see. I revised my answer to say LeBron James.
Is he?
He was like asking, what?
Is he alive? Oh my gosh, Kenna.
I've never heard you talk like that.
Are you serious?
Is he alive?
He's in year 19 playing on the Los Angeles Lakers.
He's still playing.
Yeah, he's still playing. Oh my gosh, the second greatest player of all time.
Wow. Okay, and why would you want to hang out with him?
Because I would know who he was, and that would be enough for me.
Okay.
Because I would just go, man, I'm hanging out with LeBron James. This is cool.
I think you'd be disappointed.
Why?
I just feel like they're like,
Molly has some secret
I don't
intel.
know. I just think you'd be disappointed.
Yeah, no, like they say it on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Like that's one of their main themes. Like, don't meet your heroes.
Andy Samberg.
Andy
would be a
Samberg
good
would be
one.
a good one. I know.
Andy Samberg would be a fun hang.
I feel like I'm really bad at the celebrity questions every time we ask these, but I feel like I wouldn't want to hang out with like a peer type person, like someone my age.
Like, not Taylor Swift.
No, because I think I would just feel like a weird intimidation, or like it would just be a weird vibe. But I think I would want to hang out with like a dad like celebrity figure.
Tom Hanks.
Yeah, like Tom Hanks.
Dude.
Like that would be kind of the
Barack
the
Obama.
lane I would be in. Yeah, dude.
That would be awesome.
That would be fun. Like
He
to
is a
gain
dad
some weight.
vibe.
Like,
Yes.
like I would want to hang out with someone who I could learn from or gain wisdom from, or like, I don't know.
So you're taking it more as like
mature
who's going to
answer.
mentor you.
Yeah.
That's how you're
Yeah.
thinking it as.
Yeah,
Yes.
you've got mentor vibes.
Yes.
To your answer.
Josh is like, but then you were like, but there's also the like good hang version of it.
I'm thinking far too much about this question. I've
know.
already given my
It's just
answer.
supposed to be fun. It's just supposed to be fun.
I think I would choose. And they have to be alive presently.
No, I guess not.
You can't say NT right.
Yeah,
That's your go-to.
It was my go-to. I was literally thinking, what theologian am I going to sit
You
down?
were gonna say that?
I was going to say whatever. I was thinking of a theologian, so I can sit down and ask them all the questions. I know
It's something more for friendship.
Okay.
You can't be friends with NT, right?
He could.
Then I would probably choose a comedian as well. I would probably choose Stephen Colbert.
Yeah.
I feel like he would be a great
I
hang.
like him. Yeah.
I feel like he'd be a great hang, and I feel like he would do all the wisdom
kind of
mentoring
dad
thing.
vibes.
Yes,
Yeah.
he is.
Yeah.
He's
Like-
less sarcastic than some.
Yeah, and he likes nerdy things like I do, and I think he like. If you've ever listened to him in an interview, I watch how his brain works, and it feels very similar to how my brain works, and I feel like I want to hang out with Stephen Colbert.
Good answer.
Yeah.
All right, if any of those celebrities are listening to us, hit us up.
Stephen Colbert, if you're
If
listening
Oprah's
to our,
listening,
Add us.
can you
Dude, if Oprah's listening.
then we
Then
have
what?
it made.
Yeah, seriously.
So the reason I ask about celebrities, although I think I've asked about celebrities maybe the past like 3 or 4 weeks anyway, because you
fine.
guys love celebrities.
we do.
Yeah. You and Josh.
You
Garrett and
just
Josh.
said, as you brought your lunch out, I'm Kourtney Kardashian.
I do particularly like the Kardashians, and that's just about it, right?
And
I
Taylor-
never
and Taylor
talk
Swift.
about anyone else.
And Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a given.
And Tom Hanks.
I don't, but there's not much to follow about him. Like
Yes.
you love, everyone loves Tom Hanks, you know, I just bring it up more than maybe some do. What I'm saying is
most.
whenever I think about what would be a fun way to get to know my friends deeper, I have to think, what are your interests? And I think you boys love celebrities.
You boys over here.
Pop culture. I think.
Yeah,
it's
pop
probably
culture.
more
Yeah, you're right. But the reason today I specifically did choose a celebrity question is because we're going to talk about celebrity pastors.
Whoa! I see
Which
what you did there.
May or may not be an anomaly term.
Does Garrett count as a celebrity pastor? Just kidding.
No, I really.
you
Kidding.
have some of the characteristics where you could be.
After this conversation,
I know.
where I know it's going, that it doesn't
Seems
feel great.
offensive. Yeah. Because what we're going to talk about specifically are celebrity pastor moral failings.
Gary, you really look like you could really take a church.
Yikes. That's not the stuff I meant for the record
Yes,
of
I
why you could be
know,
a
I
celebrity.
know.
You just have celebrity vibes.
I don't know how to respond to these compliments.
Yeah. Yeah. You're fun, basically.
Yes.
But what we're going to talk about are and it doesn't not necessarily just celebrity pastors, basically influential Christians. There's we all know, people with huge Instagram following who talk about faith and tweet out things and, cost $20,000 to get them on a stage to preach a sermon or whatever it is. Christian influencers, and what happens and why it makes us so restless when they have some kind of moral failing, whether it's something comes out about an affair or whatever it is. That can really, really shake up entire communities of people. Obviously, the community that they themselves shepherd, but also Christians as a whole, I think can get really restless when that kind of thing happens. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah. So why do celebrity pastors even exist? As I was introducing this, I was saying that term in and of itself in some ways doesn't even make sense to me. To say celebrity pastor, those seem like two different things, but yet they do exist. So why do celebrity pastors exist? What is the point of a pastor?
Well, I mean, to me, it probably begs a different question first, which is, what is a pastor, and what does a pastor do, or what is their role or job, and then how in the world can we add in what cultural landscape does the qualifier celebrity seem to augment, change, or make that thing true? Because to some degree, I feel like the words celebrity and pastor seem highly contradictory, but in our current cultural landscape, I can understand how they exist. So I don't know. That would be I'd be curious. I'm the pastor here, so I feel like I understand what my job is. I'd be curious to hear what you guys feel like pastors are supposed to do, or be. That was my Enneagram 3 coming out, just like what you're supposed to do. Yeah.
I think shepherd is, I mean, you said this kind of when you were kind of introducing the idea. I think the word shepherd comes to my mind a lot. And what does it mean to be a pastor? And I mean, I've been thinking about this ever since we started talking about this topic and thinking through some ideas for this episode. And we have so many in like the church world, like kind of the business organizational structure side of the church. There's, if you have a big church, you've got a worship pastor, you have a creative pastor, you have a college pastor, you have like pastor is like a job title. Yeah. And I think that depending on how you look at it, it serves like different purposes. Like it might be a job title in an organizational structure.
Yes.
But I think some of the main, like you might have a teaching pastor, an executive pastor, and like a teaching pastor and an executive pastor are two completely different jobs.
Yes.
That have a lot of different qualifications, and why can't you just call them an executive director or, et cetera. But I think shepherd is like one of the most, like helpful words for me to think about. What is the role of a pastor? To like shepherd a community, to shepherd people, to care, like the term of like caring for a flock, like to lead a body of people. I think that is kind of the best picture in my mind of what is the role of a pastor. That has a lot of different things that come with it.
Yeah. I think the things that pop into my head of what a pastor is are teaching and leadership and shepherd, as you said. And I think just like, I think the other thing that pops into my head is more of a caring for your community idea that comes into my head, is that like, is pastors, like I think of more smaller church in my mind is the connotation. I think of a smaller church, more communal, like the pastor knows everyone's family members and they like go to their people's homes and they go to the hospital to see people and they just are there to like as nurturing and pastoring and caring for people and like kind of just walking them and developing them in life. I think of that as what a pastor is, but also like a skill of pastoring is kind of what I think of in that sense. I think what's interesting that you said, Molly, is like you talked about how pastor's a job title, and I think it is in our connotation of that, but it's also it's a role that's given in Scripture. But I don't know if it was always meant to be simply a job title. It was like it was a gifting that certain people in the church had and that they're supposed to live out of. And I think that we've kind of narrowed it down to like, you're a pastor if you have this title. And I think that that's true. But I also think that there's plenty of people who are like pastors in a lot of different spaces because of the gifting that they have and because of how God's like blessed them. And that they could be pastors in their corporate job. They could be pastors in their family. They could be I think that also applies. So I don't think that that's what we think of normally when we think of pastor. I think we do just in our context go to job title. But at least when I think of it too, I think it's also a little more expansive to like a role that you're given in a church community that is a job title, but I think can also be a gifting that individuals have within that community.
Yeah, I'm curious, G, what you do think, being the only person, and maybe people who listen don't even know this, but Josh, Molly, and I don't have that pastoral job title.
Yeah.
There are pastoral elements to each of our jobs, but you're actually the only one here who is a pastor. So
yes.
from that perspective, I'm curious what you think about what it means to be a pastor, and also how, like, the celebrity aspect of that.
Yes. So, I mean, the things that you guys were hitting on as shepherd, like pastor literally comes from Latin, and it means shepherd, but the root word of shepherd means to feed, or like fed or graze. So it's like, that's the idea, is the one who facilitates the feeding of the flock. Like that's the Latin origins of the term. And so historically what that has meant is, and this is where things get a little wonky, is historically that meant they were the ones that administered the sacraments of the church, that they had the training and the like teaching and the authority on behalf of the local community to help steward and administer the sacraments. And those are multifaceted depending on what tradition that you're in. You know, in more of the Latin Rite traditions or the Catholic traditions, you know, there's marriage, last rites, baptism, communion, confession. There's all of these, like the opening of the scripture, the reading of the word, like these are the ways. And so the pastor was the one who tended to those things that fed the local community, that helped sustain the spiritual life of a community of people. That gets its place in scripture from a couple different places. Like Ephesians 4:11 talks about the fivefold ministry. And so like those are, Jesus gave the apostle, some of us to be the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers. The shepherds there is the pastors. And so it's like, I think the similar thing, what you're saying, it's a particular gifting that you have to help tend the life, the spiritual life of people and relationships around you. And this is why you'll see it later in scripture. So like Titus 1, 1 Timothy 3, there's this long list of things that a pastor should do, particularly, and it's really interestingly, around their family. So the idea being you as a pastor, not because it's like a prerequisite, it's if you have a natural inclination to help feed and cultivate the spiritual life of people who are close to you. In the ancient Near East culture, that was your family. So if you were naturally doing that already, that means that you probably were gifted with the pastoral gifting. You were trying to steward and shepherd the spiritual lives of those closest for you. So then Paul in the book of Titus and in 1 Timothy then says, hey, look for the people in your communities that do this with their families. They should be your pastors. So I think that sometimes like when you read like some of these, that they become job descriptions.
Right, yeah.
Right, pastors, like, or job requirements. Oh, they need to do this, 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 and this. It's like, no, like there is a natural gifting that is bestowed upon you to shepherd the life of those closest to you, and that's how we do. So that is what a pastor's supposed to be. Now, how a celebrity pastor then functions, at least in our current context, is what happens when there becomes less and less sacraments to administer.
You should define sacraments.
Oh,
for
yes.
people.
Yeah. So sacraments being the kind of communal and community practices of local churches that you do with physical people. Oops, I'm just knocking my thing. You do with physical people in person at a worship gathering at some point, whether that's in a house community or a more traditional Sunday gathering. Communion, opening the word, like there's a lot of them depending on your tradition. So that's what I mean. So all of a sudden those start getting taken away in modern evangelicalism, and the modern West. And then all of a sudden, like what's a pastor to do? They're supposed to primarily teach. They get up there and they help dispense God's wisdom, that we can then all we can all like consume, think about. So then all of a sudden, when it's not about cultivating the local spiritual life, or the primary job of a pastor isn't about cultivating the local spiritual life, and it's about teaching, then in a modern Western context that literally just can attach and has been preformed to look to heroes, look to people who have all the answers, to help sift through the multifaceted, complex world that we live in. There are people that are going to be really, really naturally talented at that. Like the Apostle Paul says that. He calls them teachers. It's another gifting. And so once they begin to start doing that, then all of a sudden, leveraging uses of technology and things like that. This is a very sterile way to talk about celebrity pastors. But, but all of a sudden then leveraging new forms of technology, the people that are excellent at those things, better than local, like just better gift sets to do those things, all of a sudden can have more prominence on there. And so then all of a sudden that skill set of teaching, communicating, entertaining, sifting through complex ideas and helping make them very tangible and practical, that kind of crew of people, given technology, can just rise and shine.
Yeah. We're also, it seems a little like we're sort of wired to celebritize people and things and worship, right? Yes. I remember I have this very distinct memory. I grew up, you guys know this, but in a tiny, tiny Lutheran church. Same person who baptized me as an infant, like, was there when my dad was young, like very small and consistent, one pastor. And wasn't like necessarily this big deal in our community because we were just there. It was so small and everyone knew each other and loved each other and whatever. And then in high school, I started going to a bigger church. Like I came with a friend to youth group or whatever. It was a big 4-square church. And I remember I had been going there for a few months and I loved it. And it was so fun and so different than anything I had ever experienced before. And I like plugged right in, and I remember the first time that they were like, this, big announcement, this person, I forget who it was now, but is coming to speak in a couple weeks. They're going to come and preach. And I just didn't even understand the concept of like someone else coming to preach at a pastor's church. I don't know. I was like, oh, like cool. Like someone's going on vacation or something. But it was like, actually, it was like this big deal that this like kind of celebrity type person was coming to preach. He was doing like multiple churches in the Seattle area. And it became this huge thing amongst all my friends. I was a freshman in high school. So everyone was like, are you going on this date? Are you going to go see him? Like, I'm going to go early and get a front row seat at church. I was blown away. I think other people maybe like grew up with that as more of a thing or an understanding of it. But I was like, what? What's he going to do? Like, is it going to be a concert? Because that's how people were talking about it. And I was like, is this like a paid thing? Like all of a sudden I just was very thrown off and I was like, what even is this? And it's just interesting because we were a bunch of high school girls and I think partially too, we were just wired to celebritize. Yes. But for me, that being in a faith context, I had never understood that. Yeah. But now I see that all the time. All the time.
And I think that there is something too to how we're also, in addition to being pre-wired to celebritize, I think we're pre-wired to think of our faith predominantly through the forms of obtaining more information, because that's how we've learned most of our life. And so the people that can give us the best version of information in the ways that we can retain it the best so that we can believe the right things, and have the best ideas and the rightest ideas about who God is and what it means to live the Christian life. That's what it means to be a Christian now, is to hold specific ideas and the ones that can tell us those the best. Whereas before, in the historic Christian tradition, it was those people that helped facilitate the embodied life of Jesus. Now in the modern West, where we're thinking predominantly along information consumption, that's who we elevate. And I would say also, in addition to celebritize, I think that there's also a place where pastors and leaders in our local churches, at least I found myself doing this, they just essentially live my faith for me. There's something about the way that we consume information that when we watch a Netflix show, they're having an adventure that I cannot have, whether it's because it's fantastical or illegal or whatever. And so they so they get to live it out in a way that I get to then kind of vicariously live through them. And so because we're disciplined in that way, in how we consume media, then all of a sudden then the pastor or the worship leader lives our faith on our behalf. So we get to walk through their doubts, their struggles, and it feels like we actually have a faith experience by just consuming their content to some degree. That's pretty cynical, but I mean...
No, I get what you're saying, but even your example, Kenna, of like someone coming to share at your church community, it's also built around just hype. Like it's built around, there's this excitement, and so we're told to be excited, and so let's reinforce being excited towards one another. And then your expectation is like, I'm going to feel this way, and I'm going to experience this, and you're almost setting yourself up to experience something from someone that God's going to do something crazy because it's this person sharing.
Right. Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, we're almost like making ourselves feel that way a little bit. And I mean, that's cynical too, but I also think that there's something to, I think that says a lot about us. Like with the question of why do celebrity pastors even exist? Like I think it's there. I mean, it is because of giftings and people having technology and be able to be seen and like essentially they make themselves celebrity pastors, but we elevate it and we allow it and we're okay with it. And I think, not only okay with it, we like invite it. And it's like, our church is really cool because this person showed up, or I know this sermon's going to be great every week if I tune into this church, or whatever it is. Like we minimize faith down to a speaker experience, and we minimize pastoral work down to a speaker experience. Yes. And so when we show up to church, really what that means is I'm going to go consume the thing that someone is giving to me, and I'm going to hope that I feel really good. And if a pastor doesn't make me feel that way, then they're probably not that good of a pastor, is what we say. And they're not helping me grow closer to Jesus. But then if someone's really good at that, then we go, well, that person must be a lot like God because they're making me feel like this. And so there's something unique about them. There's something special about them. And then there's a level of like, well, I need to buy all their books and I need to listen to their podcasts. I need to, and I don't think that's entirely on the pastor. Like a lot of the times, I think a lot of the times that's actually on us and the ways that we worship and the ways that we celebritize, and that kind of distorted views we've put on engaging in church community and minimized it really simplistically. I think that is a lot of the reason I think celebrity pastors exist. And we were in our planning meeting, we're talking about how they've always kind of existed. Like we go back to scripture of just saying like Israel saying we want a king, like we want to be like everyone else, like we want to worship
a human being.
Yeah, a human being.
Yeah.
And
that can help mediate our relationship with God in a way that we don't, for a myriad of sets of reasons, feel like we can or want to, or will be easier if we had this person. Yep.
And so I think that that's not necessarily new in the tendency that humans have to celebritize or to worship, but there is something about just the modern moment of being able to tune in anywhere in the world and access anyone's information at any time, and what that does to our faith and how it kind of commodifies it. But also I think, more so, I think it could even be dangerous in how it empowers humans. Like that's all celebrity pastors are. Yeah. To, hopefully we hope that they have humility and all those things, but how dangerous it could be for any human to have that kind of expectation on them.
Yeah. Well, and I think so it naturally follows, like in talking about how we elevate these human beings who have the title of pastor, but sometimes end up really being more of like a star speaker or whatever it is, but we sort of elevate them. It naturally follows, them being humans, that they will be imperfect. Yes. Sometimes in more severely damaging and impactful ways than others. But that's really kind of what we're getting into talking about today, is like what happens when quote unquote celebrity pastors or influential Christians, or even just Christians who are influential to you, I think, make mistakes. Like, what do we do with that?
Yes.
With that disappointment?
Yeah, I think this is something that we've been seeing kind of impact, at least I've been seeing kind of impact just friends of mine, like, like kind of a big part of, I think, an element of deconstructing faith is I have seen this person, and we're saying celebrity pastor, but I think this can happen for you if you have a pastor of a church that you go to in your neighborhood.
Yeah,
or like a leader, spiritual leader
growing up or whatever.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But you see someone who has committed their life to following Jesus, to leading a community towards Jesus, and this is like one of your main associations of who God is how this person represents Jesus. And all of a sudden they make this huge mistake. They have a moral failure. They misrepresent God to you, and suddenly there's a dissociation of who God is in your mind versus who this person is now representing God to be to you. And I think it's like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, my whole understanding of God is from this person, or is from this person's picture of who Jesus is. And now this doesn't line up anymore. What am I supposed to do with that? And I think it begs the question, like you're saying, are pastors allowed to make mistakes? Like, are pastors supposed to be perfect because they're representing Jesus? And I think as I've been thinking through this idea, there's kind of two perspectives that I have, or like two sides of the same coin. And the first one is, yes, pastors are allowed to make mistakes. And at the same time, when someone who is in a position of leadership or spiritual authority makes such a big mistake, like abuse or an affair or something so out of line with God's vision for us as humans, like that warrants like stepping down or stepping back,
and accountability.
Accountability. Like, that is very much so warranted, and it is very fair that you would have a reaction that is like damaging or confusing, or like, it makes sense, our reaction to this, because it is so like disjointed with what we believe is a representation of Jesus. When something comes out that is so out of line with the character of God. But I would say, I think often these big, huge things that happen that we, as just a Instagram follower, see like the bomb explode, we don't get to see the decisions or the life choices that person has made that have led them up to this point.
Right.
Like, often these huge moral failures or these huge instances that happen in someone's life are not isolated instances. They have been a building of a pattern or habitual lifestyle or something that has led them to make a decision, like having an affair or whatever it might be. And I think what's really important is we need to make sure that we, as people who follow famous people on Instagram or people who have relationship with pastors in our own communities, we need to make sure that we're making room for people to make small mistakes along the way, so that people are comfortable not living up to an unrealistic standard of perfection, so that when we make small mistakes, we can confess them and repent and move forward. Because the alternative is our mistakes are hidden and we're afraid to be honest, and we hide. And then all of a sudden this huge thing happens where we come out and everything blows up and people's faith is like wrecked and damaged because of that. Yes. And so I think it's an interesting conversation because there's two sides. Like, 100% we need to hold people accountable. We need to acknowledge that that when someone harms another person, that is not okay, that is not God's vision for us, that there needs to be accountability in that. And at the same time, we need to, I think, ask the question of what has led to that, and how are we continuing to perpetuate systems that that lead people down that road where there's no accountability along the way, and where people feel like they have to hide when they make small mistakes. And I think that we need to create a culture where pastors and leaders are allowed to make mistakes, because we're not called to hide. We're not called to, like Paul says, where sin increases, grace increases all the more. Like, we need to create a culture where when we sin, we're met with grace so that we can repent and move forward and heal and not hide and then like continue in our brokenness.
Totally. And I think some of this too, with just the idea of as pastors make mistakes, it just brings up that they are not above other people.
Yeah.
Right. As Protestants, one of the kind of versions of Christianity that we hold is that like everyone is a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Everyone pastors, everyone teaches, everyone's an apostle in different ways, in different spheres. Just because you might be, everyone does that. Now, some people do that and take a paycheck from a church. And to them, there's a higher level of authority, right? So like, and there's a higher level of accountability.
Yeah.
Like Paul talks about in James 3, like not everyone should be held, should like strive to become a teacher, because teachers will be held more accountable, because the tongue has a tendency to inflame. So like there is a higher level of accountability when you're doing that for a local community. But I think what happens is, and once again, this isn't about, it has there's two pieces. When we see a celebrity fail, it tells us something about us, something about the culture that we live in, and something about them. Mm-hmm. Right? And what I think it tells us about us is that we have a tendency to be really liking to be the part of the mob with the stones in our hands.
Yeah.
Because it does something to our psychology where we get to work out and project a lot of the same things that have gone on in our head. We get to project that onto a human being and condemn it in them. Like literally what the Romans did to Jesus, we just do that with another person. Now, they could have done something terrible and atrocious and should be held accountable. But I think that this is part of the reason that Jesus says, do not judge. Because the same measure of judgment will be given over to you, that you will be judged with the same measurement. So I think that as we see pastors failing, there is an opportunity for us to examine ourselves and why we want to condemn them so harshly, because most likely the thing that we see in them probably exists in us too. It becomes a mirror to us. I think it also lets us like think through our the systems that we make and the like maybe the pastoral industrial complex we've created, and what kind of version is that actually helpful for us to think about our faith in those contexts. And then the third thing would be like, yes, if the spiritual life is meant to be embodied on a local level, and all you're getting from these teachers is their curated life on Instagram, you have no idea about the embodied life of the way that they're actually living out, the things that they're thinking, believing, and saying. And everything that you actually do see from them, they choose to let you see in some way, shape, or form. So it becomes another opportunity to invite, what type of leadership do I want to allow form me and impact me? I think that's another really important component too. Mm.
Yeah, that is an interesting way to think about it, because what is also an important element of this conversation, I think, is that, well, a couple things. One, kind of want to emphasize something we've said a couple of times, but it is important to make clear, is that when there is especially a major moral failing, yes, accountability is important.
Absolutely.
That when there is especially abuse, spiritual abuse, physical abuse, we hear about this a lot. And so it's not like it's super few and far between, which is really pretty devastating. And it's one of the things that, like Molly was saying, she was saying, like, I have friends walking through this, like we probably all do, because this is coming out all the time, more and more, and accountability is appropriate, and important and necessary. So we've said that a couple times, but I just want to make it super clear that as we're talking about grace and as we're talking about, you know, other people's feelings being a mirror to us and the ways that we want to treat, you know, other people's public failings being a mirror to us, it is important to just make that distinction.
Yeah,
too.
no, I absolutely, and that's not to gloss over any of that. It's totally. When there are situations like that, there's multifaceted, multi-layers. And even as we were thinking through this topic, we thought like, well, there's like 6 different things that are happening here.
Right,
one is the accountability. How do you hold people with high levels of power to account, and hold them accountable? But also, like, what does that say about us? That's also important to talk about. And all of these things are happening at the same time.
Yeah. And one of the other elements that we talked about under this topic is, and we've talked about it in an entire other episode, I believe too, is that we are called to be a part of a local community of faith, which is going to have pastors and leaders and spiritual authority that we are called to learn from and submit to and be under, in the sense that when people are held to a higher accountability, there's also a reason for that. Like, they also are able to shepherd, hopefully. And so what you were saying, G, about like choosing whose faith you want to have form yours, that's just an interesting part of the conversation too, is that you should choose someone whose faith forms yours. You shouldn't say like no one will or no one should because they might fail. You just should choose that with intention.
Yeah, I think that question of like, are pastors allowed to make mistakes begs the question of, are Christians allowed to make mistakes? Like, and I know it's different, and we're making that distinction, and there are clear differences, especially around power and authority. But then there's also, I think, a level of, I think many people have been damaged by pastors and many people have been damaged by Christians, and making failures, making mistakes. Like, and I think that that is, a lot of the things that I think Garrett was talking about, I think applies there still in a way that like, are Christians allowed to make mistakes? And I think the answer is similar. Like, accountability matters, and justice should be done, and healing needs to occur in those spaces. And at the same time, like, what does grace mean in those situations, and what is forgiveness in those situations? And when are we allowing Christians that have made mistakes, form who Jesus is in our hearts more than, he actually is, more than what's actually true. And I think that's important in this, because I think what makes us restless often about this topic is like pastors making mistakes or sinning, making poor choices. I think often makes a reflection upon the whole church, because they are so celebritized, because they are such big deals and representatives that so many Christians and many non-Christians know about. And then when it's built on that, then it's like, well, this person represents a faith. And then when that is damaged, then I think Christians feel let down and disappointed and discouraged. But I think non-Christians also go, yeah, that's just what it is. Like, that's what Christians do. And I think that there's an understanding of why people do that. And I think I've done that. But I think that there's also a level, to your point, Garrett, of when do we paint too broadly because of mistakes or pain that people have occurred, that people have done in the church? And I think it's really important to examine that in ourselves, because then we become the judges often of a whole thing based on some mistakes.
Yeah. Are we more concerned with paying attention to the mistakes, or are we more concerned with like moving towards Jesus? I mean, I know it's not one or the other, but I think And again, like, we can't say enough how much we believe, like, that God cares about justice and accountability. Yeah. But I think sometimes we can be so obsessed with paying attention to someone that we've never met, that we see on Instagram, and the mistakes that they make, and what does that say about God? Then building a relationship with the pastor of your church and learning about who Jesus is from them, or about, like, having a conversation with a friend over coffee, or reading scripture, or, like, I just think sometimes this is, like, so cheesy, but we, like, the main thing, like, we make other things the main thing, and then we wonder, well, why do I not understand who Jesus is, or why am I missing out on who God is in this? It's because, well, we're making other people's mistakes the most important thing to us, or we're making other people's faith, like you're saying, the most important thing to us. And I think it can be, when we have a reaction, it can be an invitation to examine our focus or our priorities.
Yes. Because, like, all things considered, like, I can't remember it. One hip hop artist said, like, all my heroes are frauds, just like I am. You know, like, there's, like, a version of,
shout out Andy Mineo.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was, but I didn't want to. But, like, but when we as Christians can just literally say, like, we know as human beings the tendencies of our own hearts, and then we see this person that we're doing it well, and we're, like, I actually think that it's like we think it's doing well, and we want to have hope, because, you know, we want to think, like, oh, I can do that over my own power and volition. Like, they're only projecting the good and beautiful visions of it. And look at, like, it's easy. It's easy to live the Christian life if you just have whatever product they're selling. That's really cynical. I apologize. But like, or whatever version of Christianity that they want us to consume. And it's just not hard. Like, it's not that easy. It's really hard a lot of the times, but it's also super joyful, but you only get to see the joy, and the joy is that much more sweet because you experience the hard. And the only way that you are invited into the hard parts of that, so that the joy seemed all that much sweeter, is because you are living in the context of a local life with people.
Yeah. So my question kind of becomes, in the light of all of the things that we've been talking about, what would you all say to the person? Because there are real people listening to our podcast who have been hurt by someone who was influential in their faith, whether that was a moral failing like we've talked a lot about, or even just someone who was influential in their younger years, and they, you know, this person grows up and realize actually they have really, really different views than this other person, theologically or politically or socially or whatever, and then they begin to question everything about what they learned about Jesus from that person. So whether it is more on that local level,
right,
or it's in this bigger, splashier way, whatever it is, what do we say to the person who kind of begins to question their faith and begins to question what they think they know about Jesus, because they are necessarily questioning what they knew about a person who taught them about Jesus?
That's really good. Kind of, man, I feel like first thing I'd say is that's really normal. Like, I'd say, like, that's really understandable why you would question your faith, or why you would question your experiences that you had with Jesus at some point. If someone hurt you, or someone did something that was inappropriate, or if someone turned away from God, or if you had someone who, like you were saying, you've grown in different ways, and you're going, man, I see how that thing that I thought was harmful, or I don't agree with anymore. And so I'd say, one, it's really normal to kind of take that and go, man, I don't know what to do with all of this because it was built off this relationship. I feel like I have some experience in that. Like, I grew up on the other side of Washington State in Spokane, and there's definitely things that I learned in high school as a, like, new Christian that I now look back and think, dang, that was harmful, or I don't know if I agree with that, or just feel that I had to undo things that I was taught. But I think that what I would say is that even if someone has made a mistake or done something wrong, I don't think that invalidates the good work that God did in them and to you and through your life. Like, And I think that it's important to have discernment about what that work was, because I think I can look back and look at, okay, those things I don't think were great, but I can also look back and say, man, but that does not invalidate who that person was in my life. Like that does not invalidate the spiritual growth that I had because of their relationship. That doesn't invalidate their intentions, their care, their like who they were to me at that point. And it doesn't invalidate what I've been learning about God up to that point. And I think that's because God uses broken people. Like that's just the nature of how it's always been, is God uses broken people to pastor, speak, lead other people, influence other people. And naturally there's pain there. So I look at like David, for example, in scripture, who defeated Goliath and was like doing all this amazing stuff, becoming king of Israel, and like makes transgression later on, like where he like has an affair and kills a dude. and that's obviously significant moral failure.
And there should be accountability.
But at the same time, does that invalidate the work that God did in David up to that point? And it doesn't. Like God did incredible things through David, and that's a really massive example. But I think that happens on a local level a lot. That we're all broken people that we've had influence on, that people have had influence on us, where that is significant, and it's allowed to still be that even when people make mistakes, because you can trust in the Lord using them, not necessarily their character, but God in them. Yeah. And that's what I think is really important, is like, I think sometimes when we mistake our faith on humans and say, and put our hope in humans and what they taught us, then it makes sense why it would crumble apart pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But if you can understand that there's broken humans all around you that God's using as his faithfulness, then I think you could fall in love with God more. I think you can trust God more. I think that you can forgive people more easily. Mm-hmm. I think that you can hold people loosely in that. And I'll say this, that largely, like, I think a lot of that is like little, like, smaller transgressions. I think if there's massive hurt that someone's done in your life, and massive pain that someone has done in your life, I think the process is different. And that's okay. Yeah. Like, I think that is way understandable why it's like, why if there was someone who was so influential to you and made a really massive hurt on your life, why it would 100% feel totally invalidating because of the pain that they caused. I think my encouragement would be that God didn't want that to happen to you. Yes. And that God didn't want that pain to occur, and whatever that pain was in your life, and that he can restore, and that he can heal, and that I hope that if that's happened to you, that you can encounter people who love Jesus, who can rebuild who he is in a real sense in your life, and that you can encounter him in that space, because I think that that's what God hopes for you and wants for you, because he wants goodness for you, and he desires healing for you. And so I just say that too, that it's for some people like myself who had some things, I'm like, I don't know if I think it's a little easier for me to be able to go, well, that was good and that wasn't, and I can choose to let go of these things. I can hold on to these things. I think that's not the case for everyone. And I would say for, if that's you, I would just say that the Lord wants goodness for you and healing for you.
Yeah, that's so good, Josh. I have so many thoughts about what you just said. I think one of the things that came to my mind, and once again, kind of referring to, I don't know how to say it, smaller transgressions. I don't know.
That's what I said. I don't know what to say.
It's kind of a weird thing to rank stuff like that, but it
there are
is
things
real.
that are more intense and serious and matter more.
Yeah, it's true. Totally. Because they're more damaging.
Yes.
Yeah. When it comes to things like that, I mean, when you were talking, I just kept thinking, like, we have such a hard time as humans holding nuance. Like, we have such a hard time remembering that nobody is all one thing. Nobody is all good or all bad. Right. Like, even Tom Hanks, not all good. Believe it or not, it's hard for me to believe. And Anne Hathaway, not all bad.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
I guess we weren't recording when I was talking.
Goodness gracious.
Kenna hates Anne Hathaway.
Kenna really dislikes Anne Hathaway.
I just think she's a terrible actress. And I've never met someone who agrees with me though. So I will say
Really?
that. Yeah. Every time I say that, people don't agree. But anyway, as you were speaking, about that, like we do the same thing. My husband's also from Spokane, and it's just like a different political landscape on the east side of the state than from the west. Mm-hmm. And so we sometimes think about that as well. Josh, just the exact same example as you're using. And he'll look back and say, like, I believe differently politically now, but holy moly, does that person like love Jesus?
So true.
And would we vote differently? And in some ways, would I say that the way that they vote is actually damaging? Yes. But is the way that they follow Jesus inspirational? Yes. Yep. Like, it's complicated and there's nuance and there's gray area, and we're just not comfortable with that. It's so much easier to demonize people who have made a mistake and celebritize people who haven't yet or who we don't see have made this grand transgression yet. Yeah. And so my encouragement to people too is just to get more comfortable with holding nuance and remembering that no human being is all one thing.
Yeah. And the only other thing that I would add is that it doesn't, because human beings are all of those things that you just talked about, Kenna, that they are multifaceted. It's part of the reason, like, propaganda hip hop artist says, like, God can use crooked sticks to draw straight lines. You know?
It's a tongue twister.
It is a tongue twister. Kenna was waiting for me to mess it up.
I was.
For you to transgress.
It's like I tear you down. Just kidding. So I can, pastor, make a mistake and you can judge me. But there's two, that also is a double-edged sword, because no pastor that I know of, even ones that have had moral failings, would say, "Oh, I'm not perfect," and they would say, "Yeah, but look at the fruit." Like, we will often, and then I think in the first episode of The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, which I would encourage everyone to listen to, because it is like literally a long form exploration of everything that we're talking about right now in more or less nuanced forms, and we'll put a link in the show notes, but I think the show has some problems, FYI, but I think it's an interesting thought experiment to run. But the idea was also that there was, even though this person was harmful, their ministry at times was damaging, didn't look like Jesus, all these things that we were saying, there was just still so much fruit. There was like people getting baptized and saved, and lives being changed, and drug addictions being lost, and marriages being like reunited, and like wild stories of people being delivered from, like, so it's an interesting thing at the same time, that because people are multifaceted, that sometimes even the goodness that God is still working through them, because God does use crooked sticks to draw straight lines. That we will then allow that to let us off the hook for all the damaging things that they're doing, and not hold them accountable when we know that they need to. So I think that's the other component. I think that sometimes, like, we talk about what the celebrity pastor offers us, that it also, I think sometimes, like, all the good things would, and the things that they are able to help us see, it also at times, I've noticed, turns off my brain to then overlook the true things about Jesus and the God revealed in the scriptures that I know that are not being embodied. So it's also that same thing to help push the community of God to be the most robust and beautiful version of what God intended it to be. So I don't know, that's another idea.
Yeah. So how would you all encourage people to find rest? There's restlessness in having a hard time holding that nuance, like we talked about. There's restlessness in sometimes how shocking it can be when these things come out. There's restlessness in growing and changing and wanting to have fixed influences, but other people grow and change as well. Like, we've explored a lot of restlessness around this topic. Sorry, I'm not crying. My eyes just, I think my contact is falling out or something. So how would you encourage people to find rest?
Want to comfort you.
No. Go ahead, Molly.
Oh, sorry. I think part of what feels restless to me around this is the sometimes like grandness of the problem, like and out of my hands the problem is. Like the rise and fall of Mars Hill. I hear these episodes and I hear people processing and I'm like, well, shoot, I can't do anything about that.
Yes.
I can't go back and fix that problem. I can't go talk to those people. I can't, like, it's just people who are far away, who are making mistakes. And yeah, that's damaging to the witness of Jesus. And I don't know what to do about it. And so I think all that to say, a way that I find rest and would encourage other people to find rest is to, like, what you desire to see, start with yourself. And we say that a lot and about a lot of different ideas. But what I think that could look like around this topic is going back to the idea of, I think sometimes we create an unfair standard of perfection for people that actually causes people to want to hide and not ever admit when they make mistakes. I would say start to build a culture with yourself and the people around you and your leaders where you create an environment where it's okay for people to confess their sin. Because and do that yourself, like name when you have made a mistake, name when you have sinned, name when you have been selfish, name when you have chosen yourself over Jesus or others or whatever that looks like, and make room and offer grace when people around you do the same. And I'm not talking about the big things. I'm talking about the small moments where you lied or someone lied to you or someone like hurt you in the way they talked to you or someone your pastor made a comment in a sermon that was hurtful or offensive and they came and apologized. Like those types of things, if we can build a culture where we can confess sin and we can repent and we can move towards Jesus and each other, though that's the vision of God's kingdom where we are moving towards Christ-likeness. So if we're doing that, I really believe we're not going to have a situation where something comes out of the woodwork because someone's blown up a decision or a family or whatever, because we have accountability along the way. And so examine yourself, I would say, before you start asking everyone else around you to do that, like examine yourself and see how you can do that. And then how can you create a culture in which the people around you and your particular leaders can do that in your community. Yes.
So good. That is like our favorite thing to say because it applies in every topic.
Well, it really does. It makes me think of one more thing that we also talk about a lot, which is the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus says, you've heard it said, do not murder. But I tell you, do not even be angry, because he knows like the trajectory of your anger. If you carry that out all the way to its end, it's murder. He says, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery. He says, but I say, do not even look at another person lustfully, because it's the small moment by moment decisions that if we cultivate a life of sin, these are the inevitable outcomes at the end. So the affair we don't get from just a one-time moment. We get it from cultivating a life of lust or a life of unfaithfulness. And so how can we go to the source of the one single moment of unfaithfulness in a lie to a friend and stop it there and pursue Christ-likeness in that moment? Yes. And so I think that vision of Jesus is what we're talking about.
And I think that's so important, coupled with what you said earlier, is creating a culture of that confession where you can say the little things. Right. Because it's not about shame-based manipulation. I think sometimes, like, at least growing up Catholic, like I heard that, I was like, oh man, I just need to, like, if I'm thinking bad thoughts all the time, God doesn't love me. That's not the point. It's actually, God loves you so much. He's wanting to ask you to confront these things inside of you and have communities of people around you who you talk to, talk to about it in like a way that doesn't like freak you out. Like, well, it shouldn't freak anyone out. Like, wow, you're a human being. Cool. Like,
yeah. Well, yeah. And can you imagine the freedom that would come to, like, just take Molly's example. Say you, Garrett, are preaching and you say something that really hurts or offends me. And so instead of, probably has happened. Yeah. I can't think of a time actually, but,
don't ego choke me like that.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, I know you wouldn't.
I wouldn't. But say that happens next week. Yeah. Imagine the freedom where instead of me stewing in that and you never knowing, and then, once again, like there's some major moral failing in a year or something. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course, whatever. And I'm devastated. Yeah. If I just came to you and I was like, hey, like this thing bothered me for this reason. And then you were able to be like, you know what? Yeah. Like I confess that I want to do the work to like undo whatever it is in me that led me to say that thing. And then there was forgiveness and then there was reconciliation. And then you were more intentional moving forward to where you didn't then give some like blasphemous sermon a year later. Yeah. And I didn't have to like talk bad about you behind your back or whatever, just like what you're saying, Malls, of like cultivating a culture and a life and a community of confession, reconciliation.
Yeah. I mean, I would say though, like, I think that we're attempting to do a lot of this stuff as our own staff team. I mean, like as someone that we're doing this as leaders, just as transparency, we're trying to cultivate spaces because we are professional Christians. We're asking you to consume our stuff to help think in the ways that we think, to help, because we really do think it's going to be beneficial to your life. And so like an example of like something Kenneth said, we actually didn't talk about this, and I don't know if you're going to know what I'm going to say. Like, so there was a time like we were having a couple meetings with some local church leaders, and Kenna's like, I just felt discounted because I was a woman, and I had to say my voice a little bit louder, and it felt like if I didn't say it exactly right, it was more discredited, and then I was having the same thing that I just said explained back to me, like typical kind of like mansplaining behaviors. And then I did a standard thing, which is like, oh, well, like, I don't think they meant it that way. I don't think they meant it that way. I don't think it meant it that way. And then Kenna just like looked at me, she's like, that's fair. I think what's the hardest and most frustrating is when I say something to have you not believe me. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I had to take a second and think about that. And let's like, I was living out of that spot, and Kenna called me on it. And then I circled back around to her and I said, hey, you're right. You called me out on something that I needed to be called out on, and I repent. And that's a small little thing. But it does take courage, particularly, and a lot of these times these things happen where it does require courage from people that oftentimes have less power, in this case, a woman on a staff team of which she's talking to her boss, to say something. But then it also requires honesty from the pastor to be able to say it, to say, you're right. Like, I'm not the best. We're fine. Like, Ken and I can work through this. I'm not, There's other times where you all have probably confronted me and I didn't deal with it well. And we could probably talk about those too. But like, there are moments like that I think we're trying to do this stuff as a staff team as much as possible. Yeah. And it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination.
And it's definitely mutual. I think that what you're saying is really important, because we're putting a lot of emphasis on us as consumers or listeners or congregants or whatever, to make sure to hold space for other people to make mistakes. But I don't want people to hear that it's your responsibility if someone else messes up. Yes. Like, I think like it's what's the word? Like
mutual.
And it's like, there's a word I'm looking for that I can't think of, but it's not Kenna's responsibility to make sure that Garrett doesn't make mistakes, but it is maybe the word I was thinking of was symbiotic, but I don't think that's the right word for this context. That's definitely not it, but it's accountability. Yes. And that's the whole vision of what we're talking about. Yeah. Like, we get to create that culture so that you have an opportunity. That's loving of Kenna to share that with you. But she doesn't have to, and she still holds at her and that still happened.
Yep.
And it's not her responsibility to make sure that you don't make that mistake again, but
Yes.
she gets to share that with you so that you have an opportunity
Yes.
to own that for yourself.
It is, I would caveat that in one way. It is our responsibility to the extent that the Holy Spirit convicts us to say something honest.
Mm-hmm. Right. I guess what I'm saying, not the calling out, but it's not her responsibility to fix your behavior.
Yes.
You have to own that
I
for
have
yourself.
to own that. Yes. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's what we were saying earlier, where leaders are held to a higher accountability.
Right.
They should be. That's good. That's healthy.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say the way that you find rest is in this whole topic of pastor moral failure or even Christian failure, and what does that mean for us, and especially if we feel like we've been affected by that. I guess my encouragement and the thing that I also, pastor, non-pastor, whatever, have to hold on to is that God is God. Like, period. Like, God is God. God is who he is. Jesus is who he is. And no one, as much as we do represent Jesus and we've been given that call, we aren't Jesus, and no one is Jesus other than Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that what I'd encourage you to do is, if you are in a space where your faith has been impacted, or if you feel like someone has failed you, to cling to the reality of who Jesus is, and to cling to the reality of who Scripture describes him to be, and cling to the reality of who he is in your prayer life, and cling to a church community who's going to represent him for the reality of who he is. And I would say, because although there are people, myself included many times, where we misrepresent Jesus, we don't define him.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that it's important to remember that he's not defined by what someone has done or hasn't done. It's influenced by us, but I think our invitation is to say, what is my faith built on? Like, is it built on the reality of who I believe Jesus to be? Or is my faith built on a person or something fallible, like that is likely going to make a mistake? Or is my faith built on an experience I had at this camp? Or is my faith built on this youth group or this church or whatever it is? Like, those are all great things, but do they point towards building your faith upon the reality of Jesus?
Yes.
And that's the point of those things. It's not to say I had this great experience here, and so my faith is built off what I experienced there.
Yeah.
It's that experience pointed you towards the reality of God.
Yeah.
And so remember who God is, depend on who God is, and be in process about who God is. Like, enter into that with people, enter into that with other spiritual leaders, like knowing they're probably going to make mistakes here or there, or knowing that that the best I would say they're trying, but knowing that you get to discern with the Holy Spirit along that process. But I would say continue to do that, because people making mistakes or people choosing sin doesn't change the reality of Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because it comes down to, do you believe Jesus is king? Like, do you believe Jesus is who he says he is? And I'd cling to that. Like, cling to, do I believe that? Do I believe in who he is? And all the other stuff it influences that.
Yeah.
But to the core, do I believe in who Jesus is, and stake your faith upon that reality?
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say, and I'll try to make this brief if that's possible for me, but all ideology and all faith is mediated by some sort of system or structure, period. Like, anything that you believe, whether it's math or sociology, you were taught it by an institution. And even if you want to critique that institution, there are counter prophetic movements that critique those organizations, institutions, or ideologies that are also helping you mediate your critique, right? So no matter what, all ideology is mediated. So what that means is, if all ideology is mediated, by human beings who are in their nature fallible and finite. They are never going to give you a pure ideology. And this is really sometimes bummer news, particularly for the version of evangelical Christians that we have a tendency to find ourselves around. Because oftentimes, pastors such as myself will present to you the unadulterated truth about who Jesus is, but that's impossible. They are presenting to you a version of Jesus that they read in a scripture that was based on the copy of a letter that was there, that watched Jesus in their own finiteness, that was written in a language from 2,000 years ago that was translated into now. All of it's mediated. And that's okay. That doesn't discredit anything. That doesn't make your faith less tenable. Actually, I think it makes it even that much more beautiful that God's Spirit has been able to sustain a work in the world, leveraging such crooked sticks to make straight lines. So all that to say is there's lots of good reasons, honestly, to not be a Christian. There's lots of good reasons to not go to church. What I would like to say is that because a celebrity pastor that you followed on Instagram maybe did something really atrocious and awful, it is a hard one for me to swallow as why you shouldn't.
Right.
Because we all know human beings have the most, like, we've watched it happen throughout history, like have a tendency to do some pretty heinous stuff. Mm-hmm. And just because you have Jesus in your life does not mean, I think does not mean that you're not culpable to that. Mm-hmm. I think Oswald Chambers said that is an act of moral lunacy to look at dictators and say, I could never be that. No, the seed of that darkness exists in every single one of us. And so what I would like to submit to you simply is to think about, just because celebrity pastors fail, and there will be more of them that will, that does not invalidate the work of God in the local church. If you want to meet some really incredible pastor shepherds, like there are incredible ones serving in your local communities that have like congregations of 50 to 120.
For sure. Yeah.
Who just love their people. They are not celebrities. They are just there to help build the community life, right? So I want to just, and if you are harmed and you do leave, and then you find resonance with all these people that are also frustrated at the brokenness of the church, that frustration is also mediated by a group of people and a set of ideologies and a set of experiences that will help shepherd and steward you. You cannot escape it. So the question is what it looks like to enter into dialogue with God's Spirit that is inside of you, with the people that you love and trust, and say, God, what would you have for me?
And to choose who mediates you.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That you have a decision in that.
Circling it all the way back to the beginning.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can stay tuned for all of our content.